This is the Precision Report Writer 1 webinar. In this webinar, we're going to be looking at the basics of creating requests in the report writer. We're going to be doing a report using the wizard, and then we're also going to look at how you can export information using the Precision Report Writer. So the first thing we're going to look at is where the Precision Report Writer is actually located. I'm going to come down to the School menu and School Management Reports, and you'll notice that there are three instances of the Precision Report Writer. The first one, Designer Mode, is the way we're going to access the Report Writer today. When you enter the Report Writer with Designer Mode, that gives you the ability to run reports and also create and edit reports, which is what we want to do. The second option is Precision Report Writer in Runtime Mode. If you access the Report Writer in this way, you would only be able to run existing reports. You would not have the capability to edit reports or create new ones. And the last option with Login is only used in cases where you might need to perform some utilities on the Report Writer, and this option you would log in with a username and password, and you'll have access to some additional utility features in the Report Writer. Often, you will only come into the Report Writer with login if there's an issue with the Report Writer and you call us in support and we walk you through what you need to do in the login area. Typically, on a day-to-day basis, you'll be accessing PRW, the Precision Report Writer, either through Designer Mode or Runtime Mode. And the reason these two options are separated is so that you can control in a person's MMS user account which one they have access to. You might have some folks in your school or district who really should only be able to run reports. They don't need to create or edit any. And so in the user account, you can give them access just to the Runtime Mode option. But for the purposes of creating and editing reports, you want to have access to the Designer Mode. So I'm going to select Designer Mode. And every time you come into the Report Writer, you're going to see this screen. And this outlines our policy with supporting the Precision Report Writer. Basically, with the Report Writer, you can create reports that you would then print out, and you can also generate exports. As you'll see, the reports themselves can become pretty complex and therefore time-consuming. The exports are a little bit more straightforward because you're just pulling data out of the system. You're not formatting the resulting report or doing some of those more complicated features. So as such, our policy is if you're running an export or trying to create an export and you have questions about that process, you can give us a call in the support department and we can help you with that export. For reports, if you call us in the support department, we simply don't have the time and resources to walk you through setting up a report from start to finish because there are more steps involved in that process. And as I said, it can become pretty complex and time-consuming. So if you're working on a report that you've created, you can call us in the support department with specific questions, such as, I set up this report to just print out 9th graders for me, and it's not printing out anybody. You know, that gives us a specific issue that we can look at with the report and help you resolve. What we can't do is have you call us in support and say, I need to create a report that gives me all my 9th graders who are in special ed with their advisor, you know, organized by birth date. We can't walk you through from start to finish setting up that report, but we can answer specific questions you have on pieces of the report that you're constructing. So just realize that this screen is to remind you of that fact, that the support department can help you with the exports, but with the reports themselves, just because they're more complex, we don't walk you through the entire process in a support call. That's what, you know, webinars are for. We have PRW Friday forums that are hour-and-a-half sessions that are open to whatever questions you have on the report writer. So if you're working on a report or you need a particular report, you could sign up for one of those webinars and you have a trainer for an hour and a half who's there to assist you in that process. And we actually have had schools who have purchased training devoted to the report writer so that they can focus specifically on the reports they need and work with a trainer to generate those. So every time you come into PRW, you'll see this screen and you can click OK. And then you come to the screen where you select the school years. Now, in our examples today, I'm just going to be using the current school year, but something to keep in mind that's a really valuable component of PRW is that this is one of the few places in the system where you can select more than one school year to report on. So when you first come into PRW, if you want to pull data from more than one year, you simply Control-click on the other school years that you want to include. Just as an example, I know we've had a couple schools, high schools, that have used PRW to get a report of all of the English classes students have taken in their history at the high school. So you could select 4 years here, and then when you run this for your seniors, you'll see all of the English classes they've taken throughout their time at your school, and you could pull their grades and so forth if that information is useful to you. So keep in mind that PRW does give you access to pulling data from more than one school year. Again, though, for our purposes today, I'm just going to be focusing on the current year, so I'll select that and click OK. Now, when I click OK, you'll notice that we get a dialog box up here that tells us that the system is creating views for use with PRW. And what's actually happening here is every time I go into PRW, the system takes a minute and it's pulling the latest and greatest data from my MMS database. And in essence, what I'm going to be doing in the PRW is working with a copy, the most recent copy of my data. I personally find that very reassuring to know that I'm working with a copy of the data and that nothing I do in the report writer is going to negatively impact my student information in MMS. You know, I could do something completely off the wall in PRW, but it's not going to change a student's, last name or change a student's grade or a class that they're scheduled into. This feature simply allows me to report on the data that is copied, duplicated, each time I come into the Precision Report Writer. So just realize that it will take PRW a few seconds to open because it is pulling all that data to make it available to you. And be reassured that there's nothing you can do in the report writer that's going to change or impact your live student database. If you have never used PRW before, and if no one in your school or district has used PRW before, you're going to need to, first of all, pull in all the different data items from the MMS database so that they're available to you here in PRW. So the first thing I'm going to look at is this Tools menu and the option to load MMS data items. When I open this, I'm going to see a listing of tables. Some of these might look familiar to you if you've been working with MMS for a while. You'll see things like your attendance code table, and down at the bottom we'll see things like the student master table and so forth. If you haven't used the system before, or as I said, if no one in your school or district has, you'll need to select all of these tables. I just clicked on the first table, I came down to the last one, and I shift-clicked on the last one so that they're all highlighted. And then when you click on Import, what the system does is it takes every single data item and it will import them so that they're on file and available to you in the report writer. Now typically you run this, as I said, the first time you use the report writer, but you might find that you need to run this occasionally after that time. I'm thinking specifically of our state reporting features in MMS, and because the states are continually adjusting what they require you to report, we often add new data items to MMS to hold the information the state is looking for. So we might release an update to the Pennsylvania state reporting or the Vermont state reporting that include new data items. And you might decide that you want to work with that information in the report writer. In that case, if there have been new items added to the MMS database, since the last time you used the report writer, you could come in here and load the data items again, and that would pull in any of those new state fields, or if you've added some new data items yourself to the database, this would pull those in as well. It doesn't hurt anything to run this process again, and you can select all of the tables, or if you know that you added new data items manually to the Student Master Table Extension 1, you can pull those in. And let me use this as an example. You might notice that when I highlight the Student Master Table Extension 1, below that it gives me a listing of the data items in that table, and you'll see that there's one here, very creatively called New Field, that has an X in the import column. That means this has not been brought into the report writer yet. And if I click on Import, it tells me that that one data item has been added. If you get the question asking if you want to set a default join, say yes. That just allows this to be connected to the other information in the PRW. And now you'll notice that that new field has the X in the on file column. So it's been imported. So it doesn't hurt anything, as I said, to run this load data items. Okay, so again, under Tools and Load MMS Data Items, you can bring in the various data items from the MMS database to work with. So let's take a minute now to look at the different menus and toolbars that are available to you here in PRW, just so you can become familiar with the layout here. So first we'll start with the menus here in the upper left-hand corner. And when I click on the File menu, these first 5 items, Run, Preview, New, Edit, and Delete, correspond to these toolbar buttons here. So the options under File simply give you a different way to get to these different functions. They also give you the keyboard shortcuts for those. So if, when you're ready to create a new report or export, you don't want to have to, click in the File menu or click on the button, you could use the keyboard shortcut, the Control-N, to start creating a new request. So the first couple options in the File menu are simply different ways to get to the toolbar buttons there. Then you'll notice we have 2 options relating to importing and exporting. We're going to be talking about these 2 functions in the second PRW webinar. Just to give you a sense of what they refer to, though, the import and export here refer to actually taking a report setup and exporting it from PRW, or importing a report setup into PRW. And this gives you the flexibility to create a setup for a report, export that setup, and send it to someone else who can then use it in their PRW. Or maybe we create a report here in our offices and we send it to you for some purpose. You can import that report setup using these functions. But as I said, we'll look at those in more detail in the second webinar. And then there's also an exit option here corresponding to the Exit Toolbar button. The View menu, first of all, gives you control over which toolbars and so forth you see. So currently I have my toolbar displaying, my status bar, and the request tree, which is this information here. And so for the view, you can try out different things to kind of customize the look of the PRW for whatever suits you best. So for instance, if I don't show the request tree, then I simply get a listing of my reports. If I want the request tree, I simply check it off again. And there's a description bar you can activate if you want that simply labels this left-hand side as the request tree and the right-hand side as contents of request route. Under the View menu, you can also control how these reports here on the right-hand side of the screen are displayed to you. Right now I have them listed in a detail format where I see the description of the request, the type of request it is, and the date it was created. But you can change this to be icons or a list or the details. So simply a matter of preference as to how you want these requests displayed to you. The Tools menu, generally you would use this mainly to load the MMS data items. Other options here, typically you would use if we've recommended them for you. We're going to look at how you can move a request from one folder to another in a different way. But these are tools that kind of are overarching features for the PRW as a whole. And then we have a Help menu. The Help in PRW is really good in that it walks you through the different features in PRW and also provides you with tutorials. I know I personally really found the tutorials helpful when I was first starting to work with PRW. I'm going to select that Chapter 4 and I'll go to Show to get the table of contents. And here's Chapter 4 on the tutorials. The tutorials are great because they are divided out into basic examples, intermediate, and advanced. And what they do, I just click on basic there, is they walk you through setting up different requests in PRW. And each one kind of focuses on another feature in PRW. So as you work your way through the tutorials, you're getting exposed to additional features that PRW contains. So for instance, if I click on the link to Exercise 3, Creating a Detailed Request, it's going to walk you through setting up a report. And when you walk through the next tutorial, which is Tutorial 4, again, it will introduce a new feature to you and really give you a chance to try things out with the step-by-step guidance of the tutorials themselves. So if you have a chance, walking through the tutorials is great because, again, it introduces you to new features and it's very, step-by-step and logical in taking you through those steps. Now, under the menus, we have a toolbar where you have buttons to run reports, preview them, create new ones, edit reports, delete, and exit PRW altogether. There's a dictionary. When I click on that and click on List, it gives me a listing of all the different data items within PRW, and this is also where you could come to make changes to those items and add new ones. Working in the data dictionary is a bit more advanced in the report writer, so we look at that in future webinars. And then the Views option, again, simply is another way to control how things look on this screen for you. You can choose icons, list, or details for the list of requests here on the right-hand side. Now over on the left we have the request route, and you'll notice that there are a number of different folders here labeled examples. These all contain reports that come standard with the PRW. So these are examples that are set up and available to you already. And if you're just getting started with PRW, I'd recommend taking some time to take a look at the examples that are here and see if some of them might be useful for you. Because it could be that there's already a report set up that includes the information you need. And why reinvent the wheel and create a new one if you can use one of the ones that comes loaded with the system? So to run one of these examples, you would simply click on the folder over on the left, and when you do so, you'll notice that the list of requests over on the right change. When I have my request route folder highlighted, I see one list of reports. When I click on biographical examples, I see a different one. And then to take a look at the different reports that are here, you would simply either double-click on a request here on the right-hand side or highlight it and click on Preview. If you get a message to either fit to page or run as is, that simply means that the information included on the report is going to extend past the page. So if you fit to page, it will condense everything so you can see what's included there. And I can see that this report includes simply student name, advisor, homeroom, grade level, and age. Once I close out of the preview, I can close here and move on, and in this case I'll double click to see what this report shows me. And this is a bus number report. So, take a look at the reports that come loaded with the system and see if any of them might be useful for you. So, as I said, we have a number of folders here with different examples. They correspond to different parts of the MMS system, grading, attendance, and so forth. But you also have the ability to create your own folder structure here, and that can be really useful, especially if you're going to have a number of different people working in the report writer, or if you're going to have a lot of different reports. Organizing the folders gives you a way to organize the reports and keep things a little more efficient. So if I wanted to add a new folder, I would come to the request route here at the top, and I can either go to File and New Folder, or I can simply right-click on Request Route and choose New Folder. I give the folder a name. Now, the name, I've seen a couple of different variations here. Sometimes the name is literally the name of the person who's creating the reports. So if there are, 5 of you in the school who use Report Writer a lot, you might want to have a different folder for each person. I've also seen sometimes if school districts have a number of people using the report writer, sometimes the school districts will create a new folder or a different folder for each school in the district. So you might have a high school folder, a middle school folder, an elementary school folder. I'll click OK, and my new folder is added to the list. And just be aware that you can also create subfolders. So I can right-click on my folder and click New, and now I have a folder within mine. So, for instance, if you created a folder for the high school, you could have subfolders for different people who are using PRW in the high school. And again, it just gives you a way to organize those reports so it's a little easier to navigate around the system. I'm going to remove that high school folder, so I'm just going to right-click and delete it, but you can see that you can also rename folders once they're in place. Now when I click on my new folder, you'll notice that I have no requests over on the right-hand side of the screen. That's because I haven't put any requests in here. I haven't created any new requests in here, but I will do that shortly. I'm going to go back to the request root and just talk briefly about the list of requests that we see here. There's a request column that shows you the name that's been assigned to each of these requests. We're going to see shortly that the name is limited as to how long it can be. The description is longer, so often the description is what you refer to when you're deciding which report to run. The output will indicate if, this is a report, or in some cases I have sent information out to a DBF file. The type of report, the column for type, is important because this shows you, is this a detail report, a summary, a label? We're going to be looking at all the different types of requests that you can generate, and once you're familiar with the different types of requests, this will be helpful to you. The user is not necessarily your MMS username. In this case, it's all going to be designer because we entered PRW in designer mode. And then the date is actually the date that the report was created. A question that has come up is, when you create a report, can other MMS users see that report? And in general, the answer is yes. It all kind of depends on how your user accounts are set up. When your user account is created in MMS, the MMS administrator who's setting things up indicates what user def folder each user is looking at. And the user def folder controls pretty much the PRW. So if all the folks in your school or in your district are looking at the same user def folder, then they will be able to see reports that you've created. I have seen some cases where a district might have all the high school people accessing one user def folder, all the folks in the middle school are accessing a different one, and the elementary schools are accessing still a different one. If that's the way your users are set up, then all the high school folks would be able to see the reports they create, but they would not see the reports the middle school people are creating or the elementary school people are creating. So the answer to the question as to whether other users can see your report depends on whether other users are accessing your same user def folder. And that would be a question for your MMS administrator who maintains the user accounts. And you can adjust the user def folder that people are accessing based on what would be most useful in your PRW circumstances. I should point out, even though I don't have an example here, that the output column, if you have created an export, that's going out to Excel or something like that, you'd be able to see that in the output. I should have an example in one of the biographical examples. So you see how some of these, their output is XLS. That tells you that those requests are being exported to Excel. Now that we have a sense of the menus and the toolbars, let's delve into actually creating a request. Now in this first example, we're going to be creating a basic report, and I'm going to use the wizard. The report writer does have a wizard that walks you through the process of creating a report, and what I'm going to do today is create one request using the wizard so that you can see how that works. And then my second example, I'm not going to use the wizard. And the reason I'm going to do that is because there actually are some features you have access to if you don't use the wizard. So I want you to get a sense of using the wizard and not using the wizard so you can decide which method would be best for you. So our first example, I will use the wizard and talk about what's particular about that. So I'm going to highlight my folder because I want to create these examples in that folder. And to create a new report, I have a few options. I can go to the File menu and choose New. I can do Control-N. I can click on the New button in the toolbar, or I could right-click on my folder and choose New Request. So your choice as to which would work best for you. Every time you create a new request in PRW, you'll get this screen. In the lower left-hand corner, you choose what type of request you want to create: detail, summary, crosstab, or label. Now in the second PRW webinar, we're going to be looking at summary, crosstab, and labels. In this webinar, we're focusing on a detail request, and a detail request allows you to display detailed information about students or other data that's in your MMS database. Now in this first example, I'm going to use the wizard. So I'm going to come to the Use Wizard button over here on the right and select that. The first screen in the wizard kind of outlines for me the 5 steps the wizard is going to take me through. And these are the 5 areas that you complete when you're creating a request in PRW. So I'll click on Next. And my first step, as I can see up here in the drop-down list, is to simply specify a request name. So we start out nice and easy. All I have to do is give this a name and a description. Now the name, you are limited to 8 characters. The description, as I said, can be longer. In this case, I'm going to do an example of a report that simply gives me a homeroom list. So I'm going to simply call this HR list and click on the description box. Now, if I already had a request in PRW by this name, when I went to click on the description box, the system would give me a message saying that that name's already in use and I have to use a different one. So the system will kind of do an internal check to make sure that you don't create 2 reports that have the same name. My description, I can take more room. So I'll call this homeroom listing. And then over on the right, there's a drop-down box that controls my view of the data items. Now, if I leave that set to all modules, when I move on to my next step, which is where I select the data items I want to include in this report, it will show me every data item in the entire database. So if I want to narrow that down a bit, I can select which area of the system I'm focusing on. So I could select, I just want to see biographical data items. Or if you were creating a report dealing with attendance, you could say, just show me information that relates to attendance, which would include obviously attendance information, but it would also give you access to student biographical information, so you could include grade levels and things like that. So the view option simply allows you to narrow down, if you choose to, the data items that you're looking at in the next step. I'm going to click Next here, but I just wanted to point out that at every step of the wizard, you can click on the Help, and it will provide more information about this particular step. You can also go back to the previous step, and as we'll see in a minute, you can also preview what you've done so far. Now when I go to the next step, step number 2 is selecting data items. This is where you choose the information you want to include on the report. What we have on the left-hand side of the screen is an alphabetical listing of every single data item in the MMS database. So this is a pretty extensive list. One of the most challenging parts of PRW is you have a sense in your mind of what information you need on this report. However, you have to figure out where that item is stored in MMS and what the name of the data item is. Sometimes that's obvious, sometimes it is not. So often one of your, I don't even want to say challenging, but often the piece of the process that might take the longest is translating the information that you're expecting to see to the way that it's stored and labeled in MMS. So I want to show you two resources you have to figure out what the data items are called in MMS for the information you want to display. So I'm actually going to cancel out of the wizard just for a minute or two. One of the resources you have is in Precision Report Writer, and it's under the Help menu and Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is specifically and totally devoted to data items. So when I select that, if we look towards the bottom here, it breaks down the information by the different modules in MMS. So you can see there's a biographical area, an attendance area, grading, and so forth. And what you would do here is click on one of these links for the type of information you're including on your report. And the system will bring up, first of all, a listing of the tables that relate to that part of MMS. And I can see here, biographical includes the student master table, but it will also include the contact information and the family codes if you're using those. And then it will list each table for me, and underneath that, a description of the information in the table, and then to the right, what the name of that data item is in MMS. So if I wanted to bring in a student's gender, I'd see over here on the left, the description of that information, and then here I can see what the name of that data item is in MMS. So if I'd been looking in the list for gender, this would show me that that's not what the item is labeled in the system. And then as I scroll down, it will bring me to the contact table so I can see what the address and phone number information is labeled. Let me show you an example with the attendance tables. So let's say in the second webinar we're going to do an attendance report, but let's say that you were pulling information from the attendance tables. I'm going to click on that link, and here it tells me again the tables that are related to attendance, and there are quite a few because it involves your calendar tables, your coding tables, your attendance codes and entry withdrawal codes, as well as the student tables, the students' entry withdrawal re-entry information, the attendance table. And then again it will break down the data items by table for me. And let me come down to the student attendance table. So for instance, let's say you were creating a report and you wanted to include the student's attendance date and the code that they received. You'll see here on the right that the data items are probably not what you would initially expect. So the data item for the attendance date is actually SAF_date1. And for the attendance code, it's SAF_code. So using Chapter 6 to find out what the data items are called can really save you time when you get to the step where you're choosing the data items for the report, especially if it's a case where the data item abbreviation is not what you would necessarily expect. So Chapter 6 in the PRW help is one of your references for the data items. I'm actually going to exit from PRW momentarily to show you another resource, and this is under the Admin menu, Administrative Reports, and the Data Fields listing. Now this gives you the same information just in a different format. So what I have here is a listing of all of my different tables in MMS, and I'm going to come down to the student attendance table and print it. This gives me in the first column the data item name, and then the second column tells me what information is contained there. So here I see SAF underscore date 1, that's the attendance date. SAF underscore code is the attendance code. So you could print out this listing. You could use Chapter 6 in PRW. And if you anticipate that you might use PRW for pulling state information, another reference for you would be the help documentation relating to your state. So I'm going to go to the help menu and the table of contents, and I'm going to expand the state module section. And I'm going to choose, in this case, Pennsylvania, but the information I'm going to show you is located in a similar place for each state. When you expand your state, one of the last items is going to be an appendix. And when you choose that, let me come down to one here. Oh, Pennsylvania, you have so much. I just want the student one. There we go. If I come down to the listing of the items in the student file that you submit, you'll notice that we have a column that tells us the information that's included in the file, and then a column that gives us the MMS field name. So you could look for PA 15 DIST in PRW if that's information you want to pull there. So again, if you expand your state in the help table of contents, the appendix is generally the last item or one of the last items, and you can find the file that contains the information you're interested in reporting on in PRW, and you'll find a column for the MMS field so you know what to look for in PRW. So let me go back in. And I'll start that wizard up again. So I'll click on my folder, go to New. Bear with me one moment. Okay, so let me go back into PRW. I'll click on my folder and go to New. I'm doing a detail request, and I'll go back to the wizard. Give it this name. And I'll go to Next. Okay, so here I select the data items I want to include on the report. Now, in my example, I'm going to do a listing of homeroom numbers, student names, birthday, and gender. Now, the nice thing is I do not have to select those items in the order I want them to appear on the report. I can adjust the order later. This listing, as I said, is alphabetical. And if you click in the listing on the left-hand side, you can start typing the item you're looking for, and it will bring you to that part of the list. So I'm going to type an HR for homeroom, and I have the abbreviation of the data item, homeroom, and then the center column gives me the 3-letter abbreviation for the table it's coming from. EMF is the equivalent of the student master table. So to move homeroom over to the items I've selected, I simply double-click on it. If I accidentally click on something I do not want to include on my report and it gets moved over to the right-hand side, all you have to do is double-click on it here and it will be placed back in the left-hand side. So I'll double-click on this and it gets removed from what I'm including on my report. Now I also wanted birthday. So I'll choose birth date. And I wanted gender. I'll double click on that. And I also wanted the student name. Now, one of the nice features about the report writer is it contains some data items that combine fields to make it easier for you to pull information onto a report. So I could, if I wanted to, pull the last name field and then the first name field and pull those over separately. But again, one of the nice things about the report writer is I have some combined fields that are available for me. And you're always going to be able to tell what the combined fields are in PRW because instead of being in all capital letters, you're going to see a mixed case listing. And as you can see here, under the F's, I have an option for first, middle, and last. And also what's a little different about this item is the table, as opposed to being just a 3-letter abbreviation, is MMS_FILT. Now, if I select an item from this MMS FILT table, one of the added bonuses I have is that when I run the report, the system will look at the filter I have running in MMS and give me just those students. So if my filter includes all active students and I have an item from the MMS FILT table in my report writer report, it will just give me active students. If my filter is just 12th graders, when I run the report in PRW and I include an item from MMS FILT, it will include just my 12th graders. Now for the name, I can choose first, middle, last name, or I can choose last, first, middle. So I'm going to move that over as the option that I want there. So again, you double click on the items that you want to include on the report. And once they're over on the right-hand side, you can drag with your mouse these boxes in front of each field to change the order. So I want to move the name up under homeroom. Now, before I move on to the next step, you'll notice that now that I've selected some information to include on the report, I have access to the preview button. I personally am a huge fan of previewing my report as I construct it. I like previewing actually after each different step that I complete in setting up a report. And the reason for that is, and this is just a personal preference I suppose, but I like to preview after each different part of the report that I set up because if there's an issue, it's easier to troubleshoot, because I'm working on one specific part of the report and I can address it right then, rather than waiting until I've set everything up and then previewing the report, and then if something isn't right, I've got a lot more, different variables that I need to look at to resolve that question. So every time I select data items for a report, I preview, because my main goal here, and it's one of the most important ones, is to make sure I have the information I want. So when I click on Preview, I'm looking to make sure that I have homeroom numbers, student names, birth dates, and gender. Now let me show you why this is such an important piece. I'm going to remove this birth date field because you might have noticed that there's another birth date field. It doesn't have an underscore, and I'm going to move that over. Let's say that that's the one I moved over when I first did this. When I preview, I'm going to notice that there's no information in the birth date field. And when I see that, that tells me, okay, I picked the wrong field, the wrong data item when I made these selections. And no report's going to be very useful to you if it doesn't contain the information you wanted. So it's really important to preview after you select your data items to make sure, just as a baseline, that you have the data you need. So in this case, this birth date field isn't going to work for me, so I'm going to double click to remove that, and I'm going to choose the one that has the underscore and move that up after the student name to make sure I have that data. You'll notice that the print preview bar here is just like the one you have when you're working in the main MMS. So I'll close out of my preview here, and I can go on to the next step in the process. I also, in the wizard, have the option to go back to any of the previous steps. So now that I've selected the data items, I'm going to go on to step 3, which is filtering. Now, when I filter my report, I can limit the information that's included on it. And you'll notice that this is optional. If I want this report to report all the students, all my active students in the school, I might not need any other filter. In this case, though, just so we have an experience of how you set up a filter, I'm going to set up a filter by grade level. So I'm going to click on the Add button. And for the data item, again, I get an alphabetical listing of all the data items in the system. And because I want to filter by grade level, I'm going to type a GR and scroll down until I get to the grade level field, so grade LVL. Now you'll notice that there are 2 instances of this grade level field. I'm going to choose the one from the student master table because that's what most of my information is based on. So I'll choose the one from EMF. And then in the relationship, I can say the grade level is like, and I can type in the grade level I want to include on this report. When you're typing in the value, it's really important to make sure you're typing it in exactly the way it's entered into the student records. Because, for instance, if you typed in a 9, let's say, for 9th grade, and your students have a 09 in their grade level field in the biographical area, the report isn't going to find any students for you. So it's important to make sure that you have the value typed in exactly as it is recorded in the student records. Now, once you've typed in the value, you want to hit the Enter key. And when you hit the Enter key, you get an OK button that will exit you out of this screen, but also you get access to a button that shows a list of values in the field that you chose. So if I click on Show List of Values, this tells me that my 9th graders are entered as 09, so I have to make sure that I, use a 09 in my filter. I like the option to show the list of values because it shows me how the data is entered into the system, and also I can, if it's appropriate, select the option I want. So I'll click on the 09 line and hit the X, and you'll notice it puts that value in the box for me. Okay. I can also, type in the value I want and then hit OK, and it brings me back to the screen where I can see the filter that I created, and I can preview at this point also. So I have a more condensed listing of students than I had before, and these would be my 10th graders. So you can filter your report based on whatever criteria is appropriate. I'm going to click on Next, and step number 4, which also is optional, gives me control over sorting and grouping the information. Now right now there's no sort of rhyme or reason to how the students are listed, so here I want to sort the students by homeroom. So over on the left I have the data items that I selected for this report. I can sort based on any of that information, and if it's appropriate, you'll notice that you can also indicate that you want to sort based on all of the data items in MMS, and you'd be able to sort on something other than what you've selected in the report. So if you wanted to sort by year of grad or grade level or something like that. I'm going to focus on the items I've actually put in the report. And I want to sort by homeroom, so I'm simply going to double click on homeroom, and that will move that over to the right-hand side. And I can use the button underneath the box to either put the information in ascending or descending order. I'm going to preview, and you'll notice now that the homerooms, or that the information is organized by homeroom. However, within the homeroom, the students aren't necessarily in alphabetical order. So I will close out, and I can also bring over the name field to sort on, so that the report will first sort by homeroom and then by name. And now, for instance, when I come down to homeroom 202, I'll see that the students are in alphabetical order. And I'll move on to my next step. Now, step number 5 is selecting your output type. We're generating a report, so I'll leave that as is. And over to the right, I have some options as to how I want the information displayed. Right now, I have it set to columns, so when I preview that, every student is listed in a different row, and my 4 different data items are the 4 different columns. I could choose a form, and what that would do is organize the information differently. What I'd have is kind of a grouping for each student with the 4 pieces of information I asked for. Now, for the purposes of my report, a column report is going to make more sense just because of the way I want it organized. And my layout style simply gives me control over the font, really. So I can leave it at default, or you could look at something like Executive and preview it, and you'll notice that my font is different. We're going to look in the second webinar at how you can format the report to whatever font you would like, but just realize that in the layout style here, you have some limited choices as to that font and layout. Okay. All right. So as I look at my preview here, I notice that the students obviously are ordered by homeroom, but maybe I want to actually break them out by homeroom, group them by homeroom. So I'm going to close out of my preview and I'm going to go back to the sort and group area. Now I moved over homeroom and student name to sort on that information, but I can also group on information here. So I'm going to click on the homeroom option and then click on the group button below that box. And when I preview, you'll see the difference that makes in my report. Now I have each homeroom separated out. Once I've added a grouping, when I go to my next step, which is the output type, I have two options when there are groupings involved. So one of them is to do group headings, which would look like this. So what it will do is it'll take and list each homeroom first, and then the three other pieces of information that I'm asking for. So instead of the homeroom being listed numerous times, for each student, it breaks it out for me there. So this is using the group headings. And I also have an option to do page headings. And what this does is you'll notice that the column headings are simply listed at the top of each page. And then underneath that, I have my breakouts for each homeroom. So just some very, very basic formatting options you have there. If I set this back to columns, I get the column headings at the top of the page and then the homeroom and the students' birth dates and genders. I'm going to take a look at two more features here in the wizard before we move on to our second example. One of them is in the sorting and grouping. And I grouped on homeroom, but because I've grouped, I have access to some further options. So I'm going to click on the options button and I'm going to choose formatting. And here, if I double click on new page to move it over, the report will give me a new page for each homeroom. So I'll click OK and preview that. And now each homeroom is on a different page. And the other thing I'm going to change is my filter. Right now I have it set to just show me 10th graders, but one of the nice things about creating a report in PRW is that in the filter, you can set it so that every time the report runs, it prompts you for what information you want to see. So I'm going to highlight my grade level filter and I'm going to click on Edit. I'm actually going to remove the 10 from the value because my goal here is I want to run this report so that every time I run it, it asks me what grade level I want to see and I can then, choose at that time. So I'm going to leave the value blank, but I'm going to check off the box that says Ask at Runtime, and then click OK. And now when I preview, before it shows me the report itself, it brings up a box that asks me what grade level do you want to see this time. And I'll type in the grade level and click OK. And then you'll notice I have different homerooms and different students, but the formatting is the same as it was before. The information that I've asked for is showing up for me for these students now. And if I closed out and previewed again, I could type in a different grade level. So as you can see, the filtering options and the sorting and grouping options can really make a big difference on how the report looks and how you run it. And hopefully, through this exercise, you've also gotten a sense that it's not like once I complete a step in the wizard, I can't go back. You know, I've been going back to sorting and grouping, I've been going back to filtering. So even in the wizard, as you're previewing your report and noticing things you want to change, you can go back to different parts of the process and update them as you go. And every time you preview, the system is saving what you have for the report set up to that point in time. So you'll notice that there hasn't been any save button here. It keeps the setup that I have at the time that I preview. And when you're satisfied with the report, at least at this point in time, you click on Finish, and you can either preview the request or return to the request manager. Now, I have previewed this to death, so I'm going to choose to return to the request manager, and we'll see that in my folder, my homeroom listing is there. Now, moving forward, anytime I want to run this report, you can simply come here, double-click on the report. Clicking on the printer button here doesn't give you the flexibility to select what printer you want to send this to. So we generally recommend you click on the Close Preview button, because then you'll get a screen that allows you to print, and when you select Print here, then it brings up a list of your printers, and you can send it to what you prefer. Or you can just close out. And even after this report has been saved, you can still edit it. So you can highlight the report and click on Edit, and you'd be able to edit the data items or the filter or the sorting and grouping or the output. So, you know, you can edit as you like, even after the report has initially been created. Now, before I move on to doing an example of an export, a question has come up about the examples that we were looking at earlier. And the question is, could you take an existing example and make changes to it, you know, so that you have a starting point and you just build on that? And the answer to that is yes. So I could come into the biographical listing here and edit it. The setup is here. I can adjust it as I need to. So I could add different data items or change the filter or the sorting and grouping. One recommendation I would make, again, this is kind of a personal preference, but let me back up here. When you edit an existing report, you don't get the same view that you do when you go through the wizard. Instead, you get this request editor. But if you look carefully, you'll notice that this one screen gives us access to all 5 of those different steps we looked at in the wizard. Here's the name and description. This button brings me to selecting my data items. This button allows me to create my filter. Sort and group brings me into that area. And the output button brings me to the output options. So after you've done the initial setup with the wizard, this is the screen that you'll come to when you want to make changes. Now, my personal preference, if I'm going to take an existing report, in this case one of the examples, and I'm going to make changes to it, I love the fact that there's a Save As button. This allows me to basically copy this report and then personalize it. And I just like having the originals intact and then, you know, making my changes in a copy so that if I somehow change things beyond recognition, I've always got an original to go back to. So let me do a quick example of how you do this. I'm in my bio listing example. I'm going to click on Save As. And this is, you know, just like a Save As in, you know, Word or Excel. I just need to give this a different name. So I'm going to add a 2 to the end of bio list, and maybe in the description I'll just, you know, put copy and then dashes. And then I'm going to click OK. Now if I close out of here at this point, you see I have my original bio listing, and now I have a copy that I can customize. And so if I edit that, you know, I can change the data items and any part of this that I want to, and I still have the original that I can go back to. Now in the second PRW webinar, we're going to talk about copying again because I'm a big fan of that, especially when you start getting into formatting your reports. But absolutely, you can take those examples and modify them, but remember that you can use the save as if you want to, so that you can keep the originals and just make changes in the copy. And then let's say you do, copy one of these examples and modify it. You could then right-click on that copy and choose Move Request and then move it to your folder so that it's no longer in the examples, but it's now in the folder that you access in the report writer. Okay, so let's do an example of an export because that's a common use of the report writer. So I'm going to come to New, and I'll leave this as a detail, and this time I'm not going to use the wizard, and I'm going to point out some of the differences when you don't use the wizard. Now, when you export, you still do all the setup pieces that we've just looked at. The only difference is at the end when it comes to the output, you point it towards something other than a printed report. So I'm going to go through the steps that I just did in my sample report. I'm going to click OK, and because I'm not using the wizard, instead of it bringing me individually to each step, I have the request editor available to me. I'm going to give this a name, and this is going to be an address listing. Once I enter a name and description, my data items button becomes available to me. So again, instead of the wizard taking me to the data items, I simply click on the data items button. Now there are two things in the data items area that I actually prefer that are only available to me when I'm not using the wizard. And the first is this right here. When you're not in the wizard, you can control whether you want this listing of data items to be alphabetical by field name or alphabetical by table name. So sometimes if I'm doing a report that has to do with grading, I like being able to sort the list by table so that I can go into the student grade table items and they're all grouped together for me. You'll notice as I scroll down here that all the EMF or student master table items are grouped together now, and all my contact information is grouped together, and so forth. So that feature is only available to you if you are not using the wizard. The other thing I like about not using the wizard here is that when you select a data item like SAF_code and you highlight it, the top of this list shows you what table it comes from, in this case the student attendance table, so it'll decipher that abbreviation for you, and then it tells you what information is contained in this item, in this case the attendance code. So this little reminder is not available to you when you use the wizard, but it is available when you're not using the wizard. So just something to keep in mind as you're deciding whether or not to use the wizard as you set things up. Now in the example I'm going to do, I'm pulling address information, but I'm going to be saving it in Excel. So when I pull the student names, I am not going to use my combined field for last, first, middle, because I'm going to Excel and I want the first and last name to be in separate columns. So I'm going to choose last name and double click on that. I'll pull the student's first name, and I want contact information. So I want students' street number, address, city, state, zip, and their first phone number. Now, the contact information generally starts with a C for contact, and I'm going to choose first C street number. And there's a very, very important thing you need to keep in mind anytime you're pulling contact information into a report or into an export. You'll notice that the field for contact street number is listed multiple times, and the difference in each listing is the table it comes from here in this middle column. If you pull a piece of contact information from this general con table, you're going to get multiple listings per student because the system is going to look at how many contacts you have MMS set up for. It might be 6, it might be 3, it might be 9, and it will give you a listing for each contact, whether you use it for the student or not. Let me show you an example. So I'm going to choose C street number from the general con table, and then I'm going to click OK and preview. And you're going to notice that for each of my students, they're listed multiple times, even if there's only one street number in their record. And that's because I've chosen a contact piece of information from the general contact table. So if I go back to my data items and I remove that instance, and instead I choose the street number from the contact I want to print out, I'm only going to get one record per student. So underneath the general con table, we have individual listings for contact 1, 2, 3, etc. You want to select the specific contacts you want included in this report. So in my case, I just want contact 1. So I'm going to choose C street number from con_C1, and when I preview that, you'll notice now I'm just getting one record per student. So in most cases, you'll want to choose the contact information from, that specific C1 or C2 data item. And if any one of your contact data items is from the general con table, you're going to get multiple records per student. So let me choose C address. And again, I'll choose that from contact 1. And I want C city and zip and C phone 1. And just to prove the point again, I'm going to choose C phone 1 from the general con table. So even though all the rest of them are C1, if any one of them is from the con table, I have multiple listings for students again. So keep in mind that for contact information, unless your intention is to have multiple listings for students, you want to pull the contact information from a specific C1, 2, 3, or 4 table. Now when I preview this, because I've selected so many items, they're not all going to fit on the page. So I could either run as is, in which case my font will be slightly bigger, but I'm not going to see all the different items that I selected. Or if I fit to page, things are pretty small, but at this stage of the game, my main goal is to make sure that I have the data I wanted and that I don't have multiple listings per student. And so even though I might not be able to read the individual pieces of information, I can see that each column is populated and I just have one listing per student. So I'm going to go into sort and group and move over last name and first name so that the information is organized alphabetically. If I wanted to filter, I could do that as well. I could click on Add, choose a piece of information to filter on. Maybe you just need the address listing for 9th graders or something like that. So you could choose grade level from the EMF and say you just wanted 9th graders. Remember, every time you do a filter item, it can be a little confusing because once you type in the value, there doesn't seem to be a way to get out of this screen. So remember to hit the Enter key because that's what brings up the OK and allows you to continue through. And if I preview now, I'll just get 9th graders. Okay, so all of this were steps that we completed in our first example. The name and description, choosing the data items, sorting, filtering, and just keep in mind that when you do an export, you'll complete those various parts of the process. Now, to save this information in some sort of file type, once you've made sure all those other pieces are correct, data items, sorting, and filtering, you're going to click on the Output button. And here under Output Type, you'll notice that I have an option for Spreadsheet. I'm going to leave the option to the right of that set to File Only, because what I want is the system to create a file for me that I can then go open. So I'll choose Spreadsheet, File Only. And then a really important part of this process is you have to save this file someplace where you can access it. And to do that, I know this isn't immediately obvious. There's no convenient Save As button here. If you click on the word File down here towards the lower left, that will actually bring up a Save As screen. So what you would do here is you could click on the down arrow, or you could click on the computer button and find a location that you can access. So typically when you come here, you'll see those network drives that you have access to from MMS. And select, again, a location on your network that you can access. And then if you want to, you can give this file a different name. Otherwise, it's going to come in with the name you gave the request. And you can click Save and then click OK. And you'll notice right here, it indicates that it's going to save this as an Excel spreadsheet, and it gives you the location where it's going to save. Then you click on Run, and that's what generates the file. So when I click on Run, I'm just going to see my screen flash a little bit, and when it's done, I should then be able to go to the location where I saved that, and I'm going to see my Excel file, and I can open that. And here's the information that I exported. So again, important parts of that process, once you have everything selected from a setup standpoint, you go to Output, select Spreadsheet, File Only, and then it's very important that you click on the word File so you can save this in a location that you can access from your workstation. Also under the output type, you'll see that you can save to an ASCII file, fixed length or delimited. So if you wanted to save this as a text file, you could do that. Often though, I've seen most often folks save these as Excel files. And once this is in place, every time you come back in, if you want to generate it, you could simply double click. Oh, I still have that open. That's why I get that message. Let me close that file. Oh. And double click here. It'll flash, and I can go to that location, and here's my updated file. So that's what's involved in generating an export. Set up the request like you would a normal report, but when it comes time to set the output option, you can select the type of output you would like, click on the Word file, and save that in a location that you can access. So we've looked at how to create a basic report using the wizard. We've looked at how to create an export without using the wizard. We have 2 other webinars in this series. The second one will look at different types of requests that you can generate and how to format them a bit more. And then the third webinar will look at some more advanced features in the report writer.